a band of brothers and native to the soil, fighting for our liberty with treasure, blood, and toil. And when our rights are threatened, the cry rose near and far, hurrah for the bonny blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah for Southern rights, hurrah, hurrah for the bonny blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah for Southern rights, hurrah, hurrah for the bonny blue flag that bears a single star.
I'd like to especially thank my brother Mike Tubbs, without whom I would have a very, very hard time running the league, for inviting me here to this Florida State Conference to speak. I can remember being here for this same event last year at about this time, and we were in a little bit different venue. But it's always a pleasure to be here with my brothers and sisters from the great sovereign state of Florida, and I bring you greetings from the League of the South. When I was standing here last year at this meeting, we had already been to Pikeville, Kentucky, and to New Orleans. Charlottesville, Virginia was in the future, as were several other venues for us. For us and for the country, for the South, for our Southern nation, and because of the centrality of all these things to the history, ongoing history of the world has changed since Charlottesville. When we look back on this, not just after the passage of months, but the passage of years, the world is going to see that Charlottesville was a watershed event. It's going to resonate in the minds of people on our side and on the other side for a long time, because it marks a dividing line, a very noticeable and appreciable dividing line for the fight that this century, 21st century, is going to witness. And that is a fight to the death between nationalism, or should I be more specific and say white/Southern nationalism, and globalism. Jew-dominated globalism. That is going to be the fight of the 21st century. And it's going to be a fight to the finish and to the death. One side is going to win and be triumphant. The other side is going to lose and be gone. That is stark. That is primitive. But that is the truth. We've been doing this in the league now for 25 years, almost a quarter century. And I am just as fired up, or more so, sir, now than I was back in 2002 when we first met. Because during that 16 years, I've come to realize, even more so, and many of you have too, what the stakes are here. And they're very high, as I just said. You win, you survive, and you triumph, you prosper. You lose, you disappear. That's pretty cut and dried, isn't it? Yeah, pretty cut and dried. So what does that mean for us? It means for us that, like Mark was telling us earlier, we as Southern nationalists damn well better get used to being warriors, because that is what it's going to take. The other side, the Judeo-Bolsheviks, and I have a lot of other names for them that I'll be using, but you'll find out that there's always one group that's always right there included. They would love nothing more than to see the further emasculation of the white male, in particular the white Southern male. Because, as Jim pointed out, 51% now of the current U.S. military is made up of Southerners. They realize who the real warriors in America always have been and continue to be. And that's one reason why Southerners are under the gun culturally as well as politically and economically and in every other way, is because they realize that the Southern white man, but I kind of repeat myself because, you know, in my book, if you're a Southerner, you're ipso facto a white man. There are no other kind of Southerners. Everybody else is just a resident alien. This is our land. And they realize that we are the biggest danger they have. The Southern man acting like a man, acting like Conan, the warrior. That's what they don't want to see. And that's why every time that one of us stands up to do something, like we did in Charlottesville, so the whole world can see what's at stake, the enemy will try to swat us down and destroy us. And that's what they're trying to do right now. Those of us who were there, we know what happened in the streets of that city. We know why it happened. But so far, we've seen 3 or 4 of our young men be convicted in criminal court. And there are other lawsuits pending in civil court. And we're dealing with these issues right now. The white/Southern nationalist movement, dealing with these things. It's called lawfare. It's the way cowards fight. But in the system that we have today, it's a very effective means of fighting. And we're going to have to get used to fighting on all fronts. As Jim pointed out, the economic front, the cultural front, the legal front, the political front, and the military front. We need to become warriors. That is to develop the warrior mindset in every facet of our lives as individuals, in every facet of our life as a movement, as an organization. Because we are at war already, and we have been for quite some time. And you know, if you're a Southerner, this war on you and your sublime civilization and culture goes back many, many decades. I was a child in the 1950s and came of age in the 1960s as all of this Second Reconstruction, as it was called, was coming to its sour fruition. I saw these things firsthand. And even at that time, as a child and a young man, I knew what they meant, not just for the present, but for the future. And I began at that early age to become a Southern nationalist with some help from my father and my grandfathers, grandmothers, because they told me in so many words what was at stake and what the future held for people like me. And it's just like Jim points out, we have no future in this thing that should be called the American Empire, because it is no longer controlled by people who look and think and act like you and I do. It is controlled by an alien people with an alien ideology and a goal of destroying every single thing that your ancestors, your white, Aryan, European ancestors created on this continent over the last 200 plus years, or actually 400 plus years if you go back to Jamestown. Yes, our people, our white people, our southern people, our ancestors, created a civilization out of this wilderness. But because of our lack of attention to what was going on, our lack of will to stop it, it has now metastasized into a cancer that is going to destroy this entity called the United States of America. That is beyond question. The question is then, what shall we rebuild from the ashes of this fallen empire? This empire, and I will defend my Southern ancestors on this question, although in the last 50 years, certainly we have been complicit in our own destruction by accepting the civil rights movement and the underlying premise of that, which is the foolishness that all men are created equal. Anyone who lives in this world on a day-to-day basis and experiences things with their five senses, perhaps their six senses, know that there's no such thing as human equality. Yet we've been forced to play like we believe that. But look, up until the last 50 years or so, our Southern ancestors basically were not in a position to resist because we were defeated in our quest for our independence 150 years ago, roughly. And as the great Southern theologian Robert Louis Dabney said in one of his writings, post-war writings, speaking to the victorious North, he said, "The future of the country is in your hands. We're not able to do anything. We will be concerned about our own literal physical survival for generations. So whatever becomes of America is on you." And what happened? The Anglo-Saxon elite in the North was overtaken by a new elite in the late 19th and particularly the early 20th century. And that new elite, and I'll name them in just a minute, that new elite has displaced that old Anglo-Saxon white elite in the North and reduced them to penury and reduced them to second-class citizenry. And that new alien group with an alien ideology is, and let me say this in preface to it, if you will not, if you cannot recognize your enemy and you will not name him, you are already defeated. You are already beaten. So that new ruling class that displaced the old Anglo-Saxon ruling class that defeated the South 150 years ago. And I say this as a historian, someone who's studied this and taught it. And that's one reason I'm not teaching at the university level anymore. I was a little bit too honest about these things. But you name your enemy as a prelude to fighting and destroying him. And if you can't muster the courage to even name him, he's already beaten you. And that enemy is the Jew. You get that? J-E-W, the Jew. Don't let that out of your mind, because everything that you see that is transpiring in the streets of this country, in the courts of this country, in the banks of this country, in the halls of academia in this country, is determined by this clique, this anti-white, anti-Southern, anti-Christian clique that killed your Lord 2,000 years ago, and for the last 2,000 years has been trying to destroy every vestige of his church. And if you don't have the courage to name that enemy as a white Christian, you are defeated. Now, I'll be honest with you. There are a lot of people, when they hear me say these words, they get a little scared and start looking around and saying to themselves and maybe their neighbor, can he really say this? Is he allowed to say this? Are they going to get him for saying this? Well, all I do know is that I'm going to say it, and they may get me, but I'm going to say it, because that is the way that we are going to have to approach this problem. And you cannot call yourself a warrior. I don't care how fit you are. I don't care how many guns you've got, how good you are with them. If you don't have the courage to name your enemy, you ain't a warrior. Get that courage. Practice it every day. Look your enemy in the eye and tell him, I know your game, and it's not going to work with me anymore. We know who you are. We know what your plans for us are. And we're going to defeat you, and we're going to drive you into the sea like the vermin that you are. Now, that's exactly what they do not want to hear from you, because they're counting on you being so paralyzed with fear of even confronting them by name that you will simply cower in the corner. That's what they're counting on. And when you stand up like we stood up in the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia, and I can tell you this, there have been very few moments in my life, if any, that I have been so proud to march down the street or anywhere side by side with someone like Mike Tubbs. And I'll remember that day forever, us leading that column down that street. And that was a day of great pride and great accomplishment for us. Because we showed the enemy on that day, we are here and we are not backing down from you or anybody else. This is what it's going to take, folks. It's going to take spitting in the eye of your enemy and looking him straight in the face and saying, we're not afraid of you and we're not going anywhere until we win. Now, this is serious business, as I've been saying for a quarter of a century now, and Mark reiterated. We're not playing. Now, this is not a game of dress up. This is not a game of any sorts. This is deadly serious business. And if you're not cut out to be a warrior in a movement for your people, then you need to find something else to do. Because it's not going to get anything but more serious with the passing of each hour, each day, each week, each month, and each year. We are in this for the long haul, come what may. We are in this no matter how flexible and adaptable we have to be. We are in this to the end. And we will find a way to get to the end, and get to the end successfully. That is why the League of the South is indispensable in this Southern nationalist movement.
For Southern rights, hurrah, hurrah for the bonny blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah for Southern rights, hurrah, hurrah for the bonny blue flag that bears a single star. As long as the Union was faithful to her trust, like friends and like brethren, kind were we and just. But now when northern treachery attempts our rights to mar, we hoist on high the bonny blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah for Southern rights, hurrah, hurrah for the bonny blue flag that bears a single star.